Hey crafters, thanks for joining me. Today I'm going to make a card with a fun midnight scene and Lavinia Stamps products. Hope you enjoy! So this card is 5 by 7 inches and I started with a piece of paper that's that size and I used the largest of the moon masks from Lavinia Stamps. This one is just over 3 inches wide. And I started with some lime punch elements ink and I put the ink onto the mask first and then kind of dragged it off to create this midnight scene. And then once I was happy with that, I used some blue atoll ink and I blended this around the outside of that gorgeous lime punch ink. And these two colors work so well together. Now I used my domed foam blending tools from Ranger to blend these inks because I like how you can vary the amount of pressure. So I started with a moderate amount of pressure, as you see here. But once I went back to blend, I really added a lot more pressure, and that's how the ink is so dark and vivid colored. So this is the violet chalk that's along the top here and also on the edges. And I think the secret to blending your ink is to overlap the areas and then, like I said, gradually increase the amount of pressure. So once I was happy with this, I just went back and forth with those three colors and blended them together until I was happy with the background. Now these colors work really well for a midnight sky, and they also work really well if you're doing like a Northern Lights or Aurora Borealis type background. So once I was happy with that, I used one of the mystical sprays and I sprayed it on my craft desk and then diluted it with water. And then I just tapped my paintbrush so that I had some splatters on the back of the card. And I left the mask in place for this so that the moon won't get any of the splatter on it. This is the Indian sunset color. And then I made sure it was completely dry with my heat tool. And then as it dries, you can see that beautiful glimmer. And then I added the owl called Irwin. And I put him so that he's right over that moon area that we had the mask on earlier. And I used some VersaFine Clair Nocturne to ink him up. And then I pushed him into place with my stamp platform. And because he's such a large stamp, I just have a part of him showing in the background here. But I think it is gorgeous the way it turns out. Now to color in the owl, I used the same colors of ink that I used on the background. And I also used that same Mystic spray. And I'm just going to spray them onto the white part of my craft desk here. And then I'll spritz them with water to make it easier to paint with them. And then the great thing about card making is when you're coloring in an image, you don't have to color it in realistic colors. So I'm going to use these colors to color in the owl, almost like he's reflecting the colors on the background. Even though in real life we know an owl would never have these colors on his feathers. So I used the inks on most of his feathers, and then I used the mystical spray on the feathers that go around his eyes. And then also on the feathers that are on his tummy. And the first layer, as you can see, is quite light. It's hard to make out the colors on this camera here. It's easier to see them in real life. But what I'm going to do is, once I'm happy with where all the ink is, I'm going to dry it and then apply some more color on top. And I also used that color around his eyes as well, so that you get this very subtle shine, which matches the splatter on the background. So I'll make sure that this is completely dry, and then I'll add some more ink in the same colors on top of this as well. And as you can see, by adding another layer of that ink, it really helps to make that color darker and brings the colors on the owl to life. And you can repeat this as many times as you like. Just be sure to dry in between each layer so that you don't warp your paper. I'm just using my regular card making paper for this rather than watercolor paper, so I'll know that I need to dry it before adding too much water. So once I'm happy with that, I'm going to make sure it's completely dry and use my heat tool. And then I'm going to use my anti-static powder around all 4 edges there. And then I'm going to use the tree branch stamp from Lavinia Stamps. And I'm using the same ink as before, the VersaFine Clair Nocturne. And I'm just going to stamp some of the branches off the top right edge and the right hand side corner of this background. Now you could leave these branches black if you like, but I thought it would be nice to sort of match the color of his eyes and that beautiful mica spray. So I'm going to use one of the gold wow embossing powders that I have in my stash, which really brings this branch to life. And by using that Nocturne ink, the ink will stay wet a bit longer than a regular black ink, so it will allow you to do heat embossing like this. So once I'm finished heat setting these branches, you can see how beautiful they look there. I'm going to continue doing this along the top and the left-hand side of the background. And this is one of my favorite stamps because, as you can see, it's so versatile. The same stamp, you can just tilt it or rotate it slightly, and it gives you a completely different look to this tree branch. And if you were doing this card in the summer, you could always add some little flowers onto those branches, or snow if you wanted it to be a bit more wintry. And I'm just going to add some gold embossing powder to those branches as well. And then I can heat set them. Now I did want to add a little bit more sparkle. I decided to add some details around the moon. So I put the moon mask back on, and then I used my Jelly Roll pen. This is a clear sparkle pen, just to outline the moon, and that gives it a little bit of that sparkle, which is quite noticeable in real life. I also went around the outside of his eyes, just to make it even more alluring. And then I used a black gel pen just to color over the black parts of his eyes to make them a little bit darker so that they stand out. Similarly, I went over the white areas of his eyes with a white gel pen to make sure that they were nice and bright. And I think when you've got a creature like this on your card, you need to make sure his eyes pop to get the attention of the recipient. So once I was happy with his eyes, I decided I wanted a little bit more sparkle on the background. I also wanted there to be more of a dramatic background. So what I did first is I added a little bit more ink to the edges. using a smaller brush, I used the graphite ink, which is like a light gray color, and very lightly I just went around the edges. And as you can see, it takes quite a while before you start to see the color, but it does make a big difference on the finished card. It gives you more of a dramatic effect. So I went around the 4 edges, the 4 corners, and then also along the top edge there, just to darken that purple a little bit and make it more mystical. I put a tiny bit as well along the bottom edge near where the owl is, but not making the lime punch ink too dark. And then the last thing I added to this background was a little bit more sparkle. So I used my glue pen and added some glue dots to various branches around the card. And I sort of put them in groups so it looks almost like berries or little sparkly edges to the branches. And then I used one of the Lavinia Inks glitters. This is one of their biodegradable glitters, and it goes really well with that violet chalk ink. It's called Fairy Tales, and I sprinkled it all over those branches so that it would stick to those areas with the glue dots. So you can see it's a very subtle sparkle that I've just added onto those branches, but it makes a big difference and gives this card a beautiful embellishment. So once that was completely dry, I put it onto a 5x7-inch card base. I used double-sided tape and a little bit of glue to make sure it was completely secured. And then on the inside of the card, I used 2 of the sentiments from the Heartfelt Verses from Lavinia Stamps. One that says Happy Birthday and one that says Just for You. And I stamped them in the Purple Delight ink from VersaFine Claire. And this goes really well with the outside of the card with all that purple. And then I used one of the owl stamps from the Broadwin and Malin set, which comes with 2 owls. I used the one that is in flight. I believe this is Broadwin. And I stamped him in the Nocturne ink. And I put this right beside the sentiment. So now you can see the finished card with that moonlight scene and that beautiful owl, Irwin. Just gorgeous. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found this video inspiring. If you haven't already, please subscribe so that you're notified whenever I post a new video. Have a crafty day!